Please be seated. I want all those that are young at heart, especially the children, to come in at this time. Come on up here, children. Come on, Charles, Savannah, Lena, Brian, Grace, Maya, Betty, Carter, Colin. Come on, Hannah, Colin. Who's this? Scarlett. Hey, Scarlett. Okay, hey. How are y'all? Everybody happy? 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 Who went to Sunday school? Did you enjoy Sunday school? Are you grateful for Sunday school? Are you grateful for your teachers? Yeah, who's going to school now? Who's going to school? You like school? Yeah, you like your teachers? Yeah, good, okay. Yeah, you got a field trip. You're grateful for field trips. You know, we ought to be grateful for what we have, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we? We should be grateful that we live, that we're alive in a great place. What are you grateful for, Savannah? For your dad? Your cat. Sorry, Dad, you lost out to the cat. What are you grateful for, Colin? Your guinea pig, your sister's guinea pig. Brian, what are you grateful for? For giving to poor people? Yeah, okay, good. Maya, what are you grateful for? For your what? Oh, your husky. Okay, good. Have I met your husky? I guess I have. Hey, I haven't. It's new. I met your dog, I think. Okay, here's the deal. Jesus tells a story today about a man that had a manager, had somebody that took care of his business for him. And the manager wasn't a very good person. He was dishonest, and he took advantage of the owner's good grace. You know, do y'all know that everything we have is a gift from God? Did you know that? Life, the air that we breathe, our strength, our minds, everything is a gift from God. Did you know that, Betty? You knew that, didn't you? And listen, if everything's a gift from God, we're kind of managers of the stuff that God gives us, aren't we? We manage our life, and God wants us to be fruitful, and he wants us to teach others about God's grace. In the story today, the manager takes advantage of the owner, and you can always bet that the owner represents God. And when he does, the owner brings him in and said, "You can't manage my money anymore." And he says to himself, "I can't work, I can't beg." So he goes and he cheats the owner again by telling all of those people that owed him money, "I'll cut the money that you owe the boss." That wasn't nice, was it? What do you think that owner did? You think he, You think he beat him up? He did what, Brian? Oh, he did? You know what the owner did? He told him he did a good job. He said, "You were very shrewd." Wonder what he was talking about there. I was real puzzled by that story. And then I read on and it says you can't love God and money, right? You got to love one or the other. And this guy, he loved money, so he made it work for him, right? And we have a choice. That's one of the gifts that God gives us, is to choose. That's right. And you know what we should choose, Maya? Yes, but not just God. We should be grateful, shouldn't we? We should be thankful for what we have. All the time we want to give thanks, right? Yeah, come on up. I got you a stamp with thanks on it. Thanks, thanks, thanks. And listen, this is a funny story, but earlier, my first stamp, I didn't turn it enough, and I gave somebody a Hanks instead of a thanks. Watch this. There's thanks. I did it right. Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to be brief because Sandra's message was so powerful. She came to me a couple of months ago and told me she was inspired and she wanted to tell people about Kairos Outside. You can help and make a difference in these people's lives. I know a little something about difficult childhoods. I had one. Maybe some of you did as well. There were a lot of times where I felt all alone and felt like that I had to protect myself, build walls. One of the things that I did, I recognized early on that there were bullies in the world. They used to pick on me. I didn't fight back. My mother taught me not to fight. And so what I did to protect myself, one way, I walked to school and back every day, and it was a considerable distance, about 10 blocks. I would walk a different route every day, there and back. That's where I learned to be stealth. You know, like Roy, me and Roy are real stealth. But anyway, I would walk a different way every day because I didn't want the bullies to know what my pattern was. I was afraid a lot of my childhood, and I understand what it means to be afraid. The story that we read today, as I read the story over and over again, I kept hoping that God would give me something in the story. We studied it Monday or Tuesday at vestry meeting, and almost every vestry member said, well, I'm going to be on the side of the confused, you know, because it's a confusing story, isn't it? I call it a prickly story because Jesus is telling the people something they probably didn't expect, and it probably grated on them a little bit. He tells them the story about this man that has a manager. He's the owner. He has a manager, and the manager doesn't do a good job. He's dishonest. He takes from the owner, and the owner is going to take his job away from him, and he's real clever. He goes out and starts slashing the prices of the people that owe money to his master. Now, that was dishonest, wasn't it? Now, have you thought about this? One of the vestry members did. Those people that allowed him to slash those prices were complicit in this story. They took money from the master just as much as the manager did. And you would think the owner would be really upset, but instead he tells him, you were very clever. And he encourages people to pay attention to his cleverness and said, I wish that people of light would do this, be as clever, right? And I thought, well, what is that? The vestry did too. People of light, we know we want to be on the people of light side, don't we? We don't want to be in the darkness. And yet a lot of times we don't pay attention. The story goes on, and Jesus says at the end, you can't serve God and wealth. Well, I got that. I figured that out right away, and I read on, and there's a lot of stories about money and giving and not giving. Jesus is trying to tell us you got a choice here. You can be on the side of God or the side of man. That's your choice, right? And as little Maya said, I want to be on God's side, right? That's pretty good, isn't it? Now, the rest of the story, when I take this route, this different route every day, my mother taught me something when I was younger. She taught me to be grateful for whatever I had. She always talked about gratitude. My brother wasn't very grateful for what he had, and so she really pushed that to me. And so I loved anything she got me. She made me a new polyester suit one time, and I hated it. But I told her I loved it, and I wore it all the time. I felt like such a nerd when I wore it, a homemade polyester suit. But she made it with love, and I received it as such. Life is often messy. I've told you that over and over again, and yet there's always grace. We had another member of the parish have a child die this week. Sandy Smith's son died, way too young, 30-something, I think, or 40-something. That's not right, is it? We've had several other of you that have lost children, including Sandra. I was with my 98-year-old aunt yesterday because two people had alerted me that she's gone deaf and blind. I knew she was going blind, but I didn't know she was going deaf, and that she wanted me to pray for her. Well, we went all the way down to Birmingham, and we went to the place where she stays, the assisted living facility, and we walked in the door, and I was tired. I wanted to visit with my aunt and go home, and you know, I love our bell choir, Tom. This is not a slight of bell choirs, but there was a bell choir there, and they just began their little concert. And I sat there the whole time listening, thinking, time is running out here. We need to go. There's a football game tonight. And I watched my aunt, and she was in her little chair, and she had her head down most of the time. But every now and then, I saw her patting her leg to the music, like she could hear. And as soon as it was over with, I went over and I spoke to her. I learned something valuable. She's very deaf. It took me about 8 times to tell her who I was, and when she realized it was me, she was so excited. And then I told her Trudy was there. She didn't hear that either, but when Trudy came and held her hand, she got even more excited. And I learned that when people have a hearing loss as bad as she does, you don't shout at them, you whisper into their hearing aid. And we did. We went to her room and talked to her. And one of the things she told us, she said, I don't know why I'm here. Now imagine that. Imagine Sandy Smith's son died at a young age, and here's my aunt, 98 years old, deaf and blind. She said, I don't know why I'm here. I know God has a plan and has something for me to do, or I wouldn't be here. But it doesn't make any sense. And then she said, you know, I imagine that when my hearing goes completely, I'll lose my mind too. This sweet woman who loves the Lord. That was a prickly story too. She always has looked for grace. Some people don't. They look at the world and they think the world's going to give them what they need. It doesn't. You've read a lot of stories lately and heard stories of football players on scholarship taking money that they knew they shouldn't have. They made all sorts of excuses, and some people said, well, they should give them money, right? They were poor, right? They should give them money. But here's what happens. If you do make that a norm, the people with lots of money will buy those players. And the people with the most money will have the best players. This isn't a new thing. This has happened for years. I have a friend that's a priest. He went to Central Florida when they first started the school, and they paid him, and he's 75 now, they paid him $40,000 a year to play football for their school. Imagine how long ago that was. You can't love God and money. God is full of grace. God is grace. My mother taught me to look for grace. Even in those difficult moments when I felt all alone and felt like there was a bully around every corner, I looked for grace. And one of the paths that I went on, I started to go on it regularly because as I walked the path one day, I noticed a big chestnut tree in somebody's front yard. You don't know what a chestnut looks like before you open it? It's very prickly, very prickly. It will hurt you. But inside there's something special. But even then, the shell over the specialness, the sweet nut that's inside is hard. You got to open it up. And once I discovered that, I'd never seen a chestnut before. I began to walk that path regularly because that was grace. God gave me those chestnuts. And God taught me a valuable lesson, that even in the most prickly situations, there's grace. That's what Jesus wants the children of light to do. He wants us to look for grace. Sandy's son did die. And I found out 30 minutes after he died, I called her, and 3 of her good friends from church made a beeline to her house and sat with her. And they stayed until she got to a point where she wasn't crying uncontrollably every second. That's grace. That's what Sandra is talking about. That's God's grace. God wants us to be grace bearers. God wants us to look for grace everywhere. No matter how difficult life becomes, and I know some of you are dealing with some really difficult stuff. I know you are. You tell me about it. Look for grace, because it'll be there. It's always there. And once you discover it, you can find it all the time. And then you have a job to do. You share it. You give it away. Because the more you give away, the more you get. And that's good news. Those with ears to hear, let them hear. Let's stand